some major artificial intelligence names. Let's bring in Keith Fitz-Gerald, principal of the Fitz-Gerald Group. Keith, thanks for being here. So where within AI do you think there's opportunity amid this pullback?
Well, that's an interesting question because there's clearly lots of opportunity. For me, this is, do you want to buy the needle or the haystack time? I'm still going to stick with the haystack. So it's the AMDs and the NVIDIAs of the world because you're talking about 70, 80, 90% market share in the GPU and CPU market.
So you've said that the markets were long overdue for a pullback. At these levels, though, do you think there is still more downside? Would you wait to be putting money to work, or do you think that now is kind of an appropriate floor for further upside from here?
Well, you know, of course, trading being the way it is, the moment I say there's a floor, it's going to go to zero tomorrow. So, you know, no, I don't think there's a floor in. I think that the Middle East has clearly got the potential to roil markets. So this is where you change your tactics. This is maybe where you slow down your buying, where you be a little more careful about how you buy, when you buy. But the fact is you want to continue to play to win because that's how you actually do win.
Let me ask you about Apple and your hypothesis that the developers conference that is coming along, I believe it is May or early June, could be a 2007 moment for this company, i.e. the moment when the iPhone was introduced. Why do you say that, and what will be the cause or the catalyst for that iPhone moment?
Thank you for asking, Tyler. So I think that what we're going to find out is that Apple is a lot farther along in the AI space than people realize it. And I see that anecdotally by the way its speech recognition works, by how it processes things. We have both Apple and Microsoft equipment in our offices. The Apple stuff is routinely faster, better, and more accurate than the Microsoft AI. But the critical piece for me is I think we may learn, if I'm correct in my hypothesis, that Apple actually puts AI on board. The big jump is going to be that it doesn't have to go to the web. It doesn't have to get to generative engines. So I think the operating system could see something substantially deeper and burrowed in farther that's going to be beneficial for Apple.
So I will then be able to communicate with my computer, with my iPhone, in a way that might be a quantum leap forward from what I'm accustomed to now?
That's kind of what I think is coming. You know, again, if you remember how Steve Jobs released the iPhone, he was very coy about it. He says, do you want something that's going to do X, Y, and Z? And everybody said, oh, my goodness. And then, boom, there it was. That's very much Apple's MO. And I just am hearing all the familiar shades, all the tech experts, all the anecdotal evidence leads me to believe that we could be on the cusp of that.
Mm-hmm.
What about within the chip space? It seems like you are a fan of AMD. Is that right?
AMD and NVIDIA both.
And why those two specifically?
Well, again, because dominant market share, absolute excellence in terms of what they do, and customers are buying every chip they're making for the foreseeable future. They simply can't get enough. And whenever you've got a product like that where customers have to buy because they want to, or vice versa, that's something you want to pay attention to as an investor.
So let's talk, are you at all chilled by the slight chill, the breeze that has come into NVIDIA shares in recent days?
Well, you know, yes. I mean, I'm a little concerned, but I wouldn't be very good at my job if I were chilled, frankly, Tyler. And here's why. You know, companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, I mean, any of the big names that we chase today, particularly in the tech space, have all had pullbacks over the years. I mean, people forget, but Amazon lost 90+% of its value back in the dot-com crash. So, you know, this is familiar territory. This is deja vu all over again. The markets have simply backed away from it because of all the leverage, lots of other things roiling the markets. But no, it doesn't disturb the long-term investment case as far as I'm concerned.
Keith, I'm going to ask you to stick around while we go immediately to Steve Leisman, who has been pouring through the Beige Book from the Fed and is still awake to tell about us. Steve.
Come on, Tyler. There's nothing more exciting than the Beige Book. And I want to tell you, this is an interesting Beige Book for the following reason. I'm going to read you a bunch of the anecdotal reports that come from the 12 Federal Reserve Bank districts. And they certainly sound at odds with some of the economic data that we've been talking about. Economic data has been strong. These comments are very modest. And economic activity, according to the Beige Book, expanded only slightly, a little bit, pretty much the way it was last month. 10 of the 12 districts report slight or modest growth, which was up from 8 in the prior report. So a bit of an acceleration there, but at a very modest rate. Consumer spending, however, quote, barely increased. And you remember we got that really strong retail sales report on Monday. There was weakness in discretionary spending. Consumers' price sensitivity remained elevated. It meant they were shying away from higher prices. Auto spending was up because of better inventories and incentives, ostensibly prices coming down. The economic outlook was cautiously optimistic among those who were surveyed. Employment rose at a slight pace. That's at odds with the strong employment reports we've had. 9 districts, 9 of the 12 that is, reported slow to modest increases in jobs. Labor supply was seen improving. However, we've had this persistent commentary throughout the entire post-pandemic period, even before it, of shortages of qualified applicants. Labor demand and supply were seen remaining relatively stable. Price increases, that's the important part, were modest, running at about the same pace as last report. Remember, we've been talking about slow or sluggish inflation not coming down. Well, it was stable, according to the Beige Book. There were some shipping delays noted due to the Red Sea tensions and the Baltimore Bridge collapse, but not seen as a really acute issue there. There were sharp increases in insurance rates that we have seen in the inflation report. And the ability, this is an important one, to pass along cost increases to consumers has weakened, and that has put pressure on profit margins. Inflation was expected to hold steady, and there was some upside risk seen by manufacturers to inflation on both the input and output costs. So interesting, Tyler, there was a study recently done by the Cleveland Fed. So the Beige Book does a pretty good job of predicting recessions. Not much about whether or not inflation is a half a point higher or lower, or GDP is, but it does a pretty good job of signaling in the language whether or not there's a recession coming. This obviously is not a recessionary call, but it is, or it does sound and feel weaker than the other economic data we've been talking about.
And is that the surprise in this report, if there is a surprise?
It is to me. And I know you were joking about the Beige Book, but I find this report to be very helpful in kind of understanding 2 things. One is where the economy is going and what's actually going on, but also what the Fed is hearing from their contacts. We do get a little behind-the-scenes look here because Fed officials do meet with businesses all around the country all the time. And so this is what they're hearing here. And they're hearing a story of a somewhat weaker economy than the story being told by the data.
Yeah, no, I don't mean to diss the Beige Book at all.
No, you should diss the Beige Book, Tyler.
It's valuable. I'm just endlessly.
They need a better color.
I'm endlessly amused.
It's called the Beige Book. Maybe we need to be like a yellow book
it's
or
just,
something.
Yeah,
well, we have one of those.
It was the Green Book. Keith, any thoughts here on the Beige Book? And how do you like beige, Keith?
Well, beige is a great color as far as I'm concerned, and that was about as succinct a rundown as I have ever heard on the Beige Book. So my hat's off to Steve. I couldn't have done that. But I think Steve raises a very interesting point by highlighting the difference between recent data and the Beige Book. So the markets have accelerated faster than the headlines, and data points like that can keep up. So really the message is, do we or don't we believe the data points? And if so, which ones? I'm going to go with the CEOs in the companies every single day because I think the Fed's data is rearward looking, whereas I think CEOs who are in charge of making money for their shareholders are forward looking.
Now, Keith, I did pick up on one thing that Steve mentioned, and that was this idea that inflation has kind of gotten to this point where it's becoming more and more difficult for companies to pass those price increases on to the customers without losing that volume. And we are actually going to play a soundbite from an interview I did this morning with a restaurant CEO who said that same thing, that we're kind of reaching this inflection point. And I'm curious, as we're getting into kind of the peak of earnings season in the next few weeks, do you expect to see that translate into margins as well?
You know, that's a very, very interesting question. If you're talking about things like Pepsi cans or Fritos or chips or those kinds of things, yeah, I expect the consumers to begin to push back because they're reaching their limit. They've had it with what's happening to their wallets. But if you're talking about things like tech, or you're talking about missiles, or you're talking about healthcare, no, because those things are relatively margin indifferent. Insurance companies and the amount of money sloshing around in the system makes those things relatively price insensitive, even though the consumers wind up paying more.
All right, Keith, thank you very much, Keith Fitz-Gerald. But, Steve, let me give you one final opportunity to tie it off for us.
Well, I think Leslie raised a really profound economic theory right there, which is that prices can't go up if you can't raise